Okay, so Emad, you were telling me about Eid. What happens?
It's just a little different. Like Seattle, it's really progressive. And I had not been to this like big mosque that they have here. So we go for Eid namaz. And I tried to go through the front door and I got stopped because the main
They
door
said
that they
ladies.
have. Yes. Yes. So like the guys go through the side door. Like I just was like, wow, this is really weird to like, I have to go through this like strange side door and then walk like 50 extra steps. So it's kind of nice.
How did it feel to be a second-class citizen?
Yeah. I was like, I had some empathy. It was kind of nice to see that there was like, the main entrance is for the women and
Yeah.
set up a little bit
That is
differently
nice.
than most places. So
Well, that's nice because our mosque, which is not a full mosque, has stairs.
yeah,
If you're disabled or if you have any other
Everybody's coming.
issues,
Good luck.
you just can't
go to
even make it.
Yeah.
You can't even make it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to NaanSense. I'm your host, Ahmed. Think of this show as a way for dads to open up, talk freely and openly about what it means to be a dad. I'll be joined by my wonderful dynamic duo, Twiddledee and Twiddledum, Sajid and Emad, who happen to be some great friends. NaanSense has a South Asian flavor on things, so we generally overthink, overshare, and occasionally make each other laugh. So join us as we stumble through all of this nonsense.
Guys, can we talk about something that is amazing that I found
Okay.
like last week? Have you guys seen the show Bait? It's the new Riz Ahmed show.
Oh, yeah. My wife was telling me about it.
Guys, as like Pakistani Western people, it is so spot on. So the premise is Riz Ahmed is an actor and he's trying to be the next Bond. And there's all this like...
Is this based on a true story?
No, dude, I doubt. Oh, maybe. That'd be amazing if it was, but I highly doubt it.
That'd be so cool.
So, and it's just like all the unraveling that comes with it, including like identity stuff and, being a Paki, which obviously in British context is like a
you
heavily
just
loaded
swore.
term.
Yeah, exactly. You
I
got
mean, you
banned
just like
on YouTube.
cursed our own people.
Yeah. And yeah, like YouTube's going to demonetize this.
Seriously? Well,
I'm
suck
just
it.
making
I mean,
it up.
it is what it is. They said it like every 4 minutes on the show.
Literally, that's like the N word over there, I thought.
Yeah, but it's not here. We can say anything we want over here.
I guess that's true. Is this show that popular? I am not on social media. So like that's one thing I miss out on. And I'm okay with that.
I have been direct messaging you about this in our group chat. So I know you ignore most of that.
So quick editor's note. Today's topic is a bit more serious in nature. I know our show tends to be unserious, but we do want to cover topics that, cover all aspects of life. So some of those aspects being quite serious. So today we'll be talking about grief in general. And before we actually start and open up this conversation, I figured I'd give Sajid some airspace here.
Yeah, thank you. So for people that know me closely, I lost my mom exactly 2.5 months ago, January 15th, and we're recording this early April. So yeah, that's the big news. I think there's probably a lot more to unpack outside of that, but she battled dementia for a few years before she passed, and that was obviously a very tough thing to deal with. When someone has dementia, it's kind of like you lose them twice. First time mentally, and then the second time physically. So it was. It's been a process, but she was almost 81. She was 10 days shy of her 81st birthday. She lived a pretty long life, and before her dementia and illness, she lived with so much love and warmth, and I think a really beautiful life. So.
Well, I appreciate, and I'm sure our fans will appreciate your vulnerability here, because I think what you have to share is going to be quite revealing for many men and many dads out there. I want to afford Emad the same opportunity. Obviously, your circumstances are different, Emad, but perhaps you can shed light on loved one that you've lost.
Yeah, I mean, I've lost my younger brother, who was a year and a half younger than me when I was 21 and he was 19, a car crash. And I don't often talk about it. It's actually been very hard for me to talk about it. My whole family doesn't talk about it as much, which I think we'll go deeper into like how like Desis deal with trauma and grief. But also like there have been other parts of my life where I look at my parents now and I feel for them in so many ways differently because the kind of trauma they've had to deal with, right? Like I expect my parents to die, but for them to like go through the trauma and having their kids pass away is just one that like just is very gut wrenching to feel it from so many different perspectives.
I greatly appreciate your vulnerability also. And
Yeah, man. Before we move on, Emad, just the fact that you're talking about it is huge. I know we've talked about it only probably once or maybe twice the whole time we've known each other, and we're close friends, and I know how
Yeah.
hard this is for you.
obviously, given the recency of this, what was your perception of grief going into it versus now that you're actively dealing with loss of life, for a loved one? How is it on the other side? Like, is it different? Does it match sort of your expectations? Like, what is that gap like?
So I think it's really different in a lot of ways than I thought it was going to be. Like I thought. So my parents, just to give you guys a little bit of context, my parents are about 10 to 15 years older than other people my age. So I came late, I like to say I was a miracle or a mistake, however you want to see it. But me and my brother have 14
Explains a lot
years,
of things.
so many things, so many things. So my brother and I are 14 years apart, and it's just me and him, and I'm the younger one. So my whole life since I was a kid, and this is probably something that needs to be unpacked, and I hope to work on this. But since I was a kid, I had this fear of losing my parents, especially my mom. And I was also extremely close to my mom. So I guess having my whole life, I kind of like thought about what it would be like when they passed away, when my mom passed away in particular. But I didn't think about the part where they'll age. And that
Mm.
part is actually really complicated and messy and like just really challenging. So in some ways, I don't know if it's like in Allah's all knowing, all wisdom approach, like it's almost like there's a preparation of sorts that, her illness created, that when she passed, like I was extremely sad, extremely like at times melancholy, and I get hit with waves of it. But I also have this like, there's this like sense of she's in such a better place, right? And I think having faith and having that part of it is so vital. At least it has been for me.
I want to hear from you a little bit more about this process of aging. Like, did you feel like there was a moment in time when that process started for you to like, man, my mom is starting to age, or was it slow and built up to that?
It was mostly slow, but there was a moment 8 years ago when she had a stroke, and I think that was a real turning point.
Mm.
And while the dementia didn't manifest too much initially, I think if it was there, it was accelerating a lot after the stroke. So the last 8 years have been a certain level of stress and tension, but in particular, the last 3 to 4 years have been particularly heavy. And then she spent about 9 months in hospice care. So hospice,
Mm.
luckily, was at home, which was in her home, which was really, I think, a huge, huge blessing.
I guess in those last couple of years, I can imagine you experience a whole host of emotions, sadness, anger from time to time. But were there moments of joy also and happiness that you were able to capture and hold on to?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's spot on. I think a lot of sadness. Candidly, I would go to their house and I'd be with them, and then I'd just go to the bathroom and weep because it was just like so difficult to kind of see her in the situation she was in. But the joy was very much there too, because even though she had dementia, her core would still emanate, and her core was like beautiful and sweet and loving. So, she would like, even if the things she was saying were not so coherent, it was something like sweet that she would say, or she would like laugh or whatever. So that was one thing. And the other thing was when she would see my kids, the way she would light up and the way she would hug them was just something I can't describe. The last picture I have of her actually is her hugging my oldest son, which I try to like grab real quick. And so yeah, there's definitely a lot of joy. And I think it's important to hold on to that. And the other part is that I hold on to, like, when we look at the pictures, I like looking at the pictures from before her illness, before it got really tough. And I think that type of stuff helps. When Ami passed, I got so much love and so much support. Being on the other end of it, I'm like blown away by how powerful that is. Like, I almost had to. There are a couple of friends who I went back and apologized to, because I was like, when your mom passed away, I wasn't really there for you. Like, I showed up for like the funeral and, kind of did the obligatory things, but like, I recognize how much it goes, how far it goes when friends and loved ones really show up. So that's been another kind of big thing propelling me through this. It's truly like, pushed me through this whole process.
How did your kids take it? I'm also curious. Like, we also went through watching our grandparents pass away, and our parents were in the spot that you might have been. Like, I wonder how your kids took it. How you think of it going back to when you were a kid.
Yeah. One of the things I was really worried about and felt anxious about, we would talk to our kids a lot. I
Yeah.
would, Gideon would, we would really try to have kind of real conversations with them, but in a natural way. And I think it's another thing where Allah gives strength, or Allah gives guidance and provides the wisdom, because yes, they feel sad. Obviously, we talk about how it's sad, but they also are very understanding, more understanding than I thought they would be. And I
Right?
was really
Hmm.
worried about my older two. My youngest one, and this is one thing that makes me sad, is my mom never really registered my youngest one as my
Mm,
child. He's 4.5, so that's a long time. But she did, she would light up, whenever he
yeah.
was around, and she registered him as like this sweet, wonderful kid, but she didn't, she couldn't remember his name or whatever. And actually, different than what you described, Imad, I don't really have a guidebook on that, because all of my grandparents, except for my nani, passed away before I was
Mm,
born. So,
yeah.
essentially, I
Yeah.
don't have memories of anyone. On top of that, my parents immigrated here in 1981 into the US. So all of their uncles and aunts passing, and even some of their parents, they
Far
weren't
away.
there for that. So
Yeah.
they were far away. So I did see my dad and my mom grieve, but we weren't going to funerals very often. I mean, I remember there were like 4 or 5 big community funerals that we went to in
Yeah.
the 80s and 90s, but those were like, not that common. Now, the people that immigrated here in the 70s, 80s,
Hmm.
are starting to pass on. So this wave is something actually kind of new that we didn't experience. Even my parents didn't experience it in the same way, and
Yeah.
we're kind of figuring it out.
Yeah. For me, my mother-in-law passed just about 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and
Remember.
it's hard, right? Like, my son took it. He was obviously resilient, and in the moment, he didn't show any emotion. He was kind of numb to it. Uh, but what came out was, it was the summertime, and he was at a new summer camp. And generally, he's a pretty outgoing, easygoing kid.
Yeah.
But that week, he completely hated his summer camp.
Mm,
He didn't want to go there. He didn't want anything to deal with, the
yeah.
location, so much so that that location has now just become like this kind of figment, piece in his imagination that is associated
Associated.
with
Yeah.
Ami's death, right? And that time period. So he doesn't want to go to that location. So
Hmm.
I think kids deal with it in different ways, but
Yeah.
a big part of it though is they're mirroring us, right? So if
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
are outward and emotional, which we can be, there's no issues with that. I think kids will interpret that and,
Yeah.
you know, be emotional also. I think if we are numb to the initial reaction of death and stuff, I think kids will emulate that. They're leaning on us to understand the world around them.
To model. Yeah.
I'll tell you guys I have to tell you a funny story.
Now's the time you choose for a funny story.
I know it's not, it just shows you like how kids think about, like I was telling my daughter who is now 5, I'm like, hey, like this relative, like I watched them fall down and they took a kind of a bad fall and I didn't feel like it was good. And like immediately she's like, so did they pass away or what? And like just like nonchalant, just like said it. I'm like, oh man, like
Matter of fact,
I
yeah.
was like, this is so just a matter of fact, right? So
Yeah.
I think they have some sense of people get old and do
Yeah.
pass away, but
There's something innate there.
it's I think nature's way of like having grandparents go first, and like, there's
Yeah.
some beauty to that like prepared, and obviously like things go out the window when somebody young passes away, somebody in a traumatic way. I mean, even before my brother's brother passing away, I remember going to a funeral of a classmate whose brother passed away, like when I was in high school,
Yeah.
and it's just hard, way harder to like first experience that, and obviously like it
Yeah.
goes into the depth of despair when it happens to somebody you're so close to.
Yeah, it's so heavy. So Imad, if you don't mind, have you talked to your kids about your brother?
So my brother passed away in Georgia when he was at school, and recently we visited with my family, and we went to his um gravesite, and I remember just taking some time, and obviously like it was one of those times where I couldn't like I was just like crying as bad as it gets. But my kids saw that, and they
Yeah.
remember me like in that mode, which I think is very, looking back at it, I feel bad because I feel like you don't expect to see your dad crying, and not just crying, but like really, really crying. And I think it was a bit shocking for them. So like they still remember it, like they'll remind me, like,
Hmm.
and it's at least I should say my younger one will. My older one still a bit reserved and doesn't want to bring it up. Like realizes like that, hey,
It's a
like maybe it's
personality
just,
thing too, right?
yeah,
Not just age. Yeah.
yeah. So I think they get it, and we always talk about. His name was Emad, and we talk about Emad Chachu. So they know obviously, and I have to give credit to my wonderful wife who like makes sure that they have they're really well aware.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I feel like they're still processing it of like what this means
Of
and
course,
Hmm.
yeah.
how this happens.
And what this means for their dad,
Yeah, totally.
I think.
What's so interesting is, the way that we kind of include our kids in major elements. And I think this goes for most Desi dads today. And I think most dads at large is
Yeah.
like the form of parenting is to include your kids in all the various parts of life and activities and, show them, what life is. And, I think I have a very specific memory of when I was 8 or 9 years old of, the first death that happened in,
Mhm.
our family was my cousin's dad passed away. And that was a really, just a big moment. It's like a
How old
core
were you?
memory. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I just remember that, we I didn't even my parents kind of
Yeah.
suppressed and hid the fact that my uncle had passed away
Hmm.
up until
Mhm.
the point we drove in the car from New York all the way to New Jersey. And, there, once I started talking to my cousin, I learned that his dad had passed away. And I think that's in complete contrast to how we are raising kids today. I think, of course, every family does things differently, but generally, you know, Sajid, to your point earlier, it's like this is a new
Hmm.
thing that we're dealing with, right? Like, experiencing this first wave of immigrants that, came here is now passing on. And we,
Hmm.
as, the new generation, have to sort of understand what death means for us, what our emotions
Mhm.
are, and then also how to translate that for our kids.
Yeah. There's a big societal component here, right? In terms of aging parents and just people aging, the community aging, them passing. There's a lot of logistical concerns or the emotional considerations. The first time I saw my dad cry was, I think I was 4 or so, and I still remember it. So, Emad, your kids will remember that probably forever.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and maybe I think it can be a good thing. So I saw my dad cry because his brother died.
Mm.
But he wasn't in America. He was in India. And I saw my dad crying, and um, I saw him just being really emotional. And my dad is very traditional in a lot of ways. But when it comes to showing emotion, he has been really, in a very nice way, surprisingly good. I had a lot of moments when all of us, cried and hugged and that kind of stuff. So it's it's interesting how that kinda can paint your experience, and my dad would always go do ghusl, the
Hmm.
cleaning of the body before it's buried, and it's actually really a kind of a beautiful kind of process. So there's, even if he didn't know people, he would just kind of volunteer and help. So there was always this, like, conversation around people
People
passing
passing away.
away around us, and if anything, that probably made my fear of my parents passing more
Hmm.
heightened. So there was that, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so atypical. So I guess, you mentioned hugging and crying. Do you think men in our culture have the space to grieve in that way?
I don't know if our culture is any different than other cultures. I think men in general are expected to hold
Yeah.
things, carry things. In my experience, I've seen a lot of my relatives and community members that are men grieve. I think the difference might be like there's this initial phase right after kind of someone passes where I think that is uh, okay, and people kind of do that and they hug it out and they cry and they break down. But then after that, we kind of get into something called spiritual bypassing. So one thing I've started doing is go to grief therapy, and that's been really helpful for me. So I've been doing that since my mom passed. And spiritual bypassing is something that's come up, and essentially, I'm not an expert, but essentially, it's rather than kind of sitting through the emotions, you kind of say all the right things spiritually, like, Alhamdulillah, or, Allah give this person Jannah, so on and so forth, which you should do. Of course, you should like make the du'as, and all that is really important. But then there's the other part of it of like sitting with the emotion and
Hmm.
being like uncomfortable with it. And I think that's where men and maybe women both, I don't know, but I think men especially are expected to like move on a little bit, and when someone asks you like how are you doing, the right answer is Alhamdulillah, and then that's it. You kind of move on. I mean that's a part of the right answer, right? Like if someone really wants to know how you're doing, you should feel comfortable saying it.
It can be in any culture where and like for me, like the oldest child, like you're expected to be strong for everybody else so that they don't
Hmm.
break down. And I think that
Yeah.
is not necessarily helpful and is counterproductive because you're sitting with your whole family and everybody's trying to be strong for each other and not sharing any real deep emotion that you should be feeling and sharing. And I think I found that really, really hard because, and this is where like, I don't think I hope my family doesn't like hear this, but like we like never went through that process of like just, we always acknowledge it. And every year, like, there's the birthday and the day
Of
that
course.
my pass like that. And then it's just a, hey, like just a call to my parents and like, hey, how are you doing? And then that's it. Like we don't like share our emotion, or like we all know that we take some time to like weep and cry. Like I guarantee each one of us is doing it, but neither my sister, not my mom or my dad, like we won't go there with each other. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy. I don't
That
know.
for Is that for any particular reason that you all aren't able to get there emotionally, or do you think that's just walls that have been set up over
Those
time?
are the walls, right? Like it's like, hey, you gotta try to be strong for so that others don't, like everybody stays strong. And it's like, is that the right
Hmm.
solution? I don't know the answer.
Hmm. Both of you have brought up the role that faith plays, being Muslim. And, there's this concept of sabr, right? Which oftentimes gets, translated as patience, but it's it has such a deeper meaning, right? How, maybe you can shed light on how faith has shaped sort of your experience in dealing with loss and remembering your loved ones.
I think that there are lots of moments that happen after somebody passes away that almost everyone I've talked to like goes through these moments of like having dreams and having to meet somebody that passed away recently or getting to see them again. And then the second thing that like makes me at least gives me a lot of hope and joy is being able to see my brother again, right? Like I hope to see him again one day, like, and it makes that fear go away in the sense that like there's a bright side to death, which is like, hey, I get to meet some of these people and I haven't seen my brother in a very long time. And I tell my family, like, if that happens, like, don't worry, like I will be like, there's a really happy side to that for me as well. But yeah, Sajid, how about you?
Yeah, I think you're totally hitting it. So my mom only passed away 2.5 months ago, so it's still really new, and I don't know what 2 years, 20 years will look like. But as of now, uh, I would say that this experience has definitely brought me closer to faith and this sense of hope, the sense of this is not it, and we get to reunite in the next life is really, really powerful. This experience for me also thinking about, how her illness was a way for her to shed away any mistakes or, things that might be negative for her because there's kind of Islamically speaking, there is a certain purification process that happens when someone goes through that. So kind of all of that in context, yes, it's really powerful. The other thing is just very tactically speaking, last Ramadan in 2025, Omar Salman came out with something called the Barzakh series. And that I watched it before my mom passed, but in many ways I was preparing, right?
Hmm.
And then I started watching it again when my mom passed. That has really helped me. And like multiple people have told me, make sure you watch the Barzakh series when my mom passed. And I was like, I'm on it. Thank you. That's actually good tactical advice. Because it really in a clear, tangible way, and in terms that make sense to us as kind of American audience, explains how the afterlife works. In particular, the barzakh, right? The time after you pass, but before the day of judgment. So I think the other thing, Emad,
Yeah,
I think it's like you have to find the people you can lean on because
Hmm.
it's maybe too intense to do it, with the core nuclear people. I mean, in my case too, yes, when my mom passed, my brother, my dad, my hubby, we had a lot of moments of grieving
totally.
together. But since like we don't do as much of that because it's like it just kind of bubbles things up, but I lean more on like my wife, you know,
Totally.
or friends.
Totally. And I'm very lucky that like my wife actually knew my brother growing up. Like,
She did.
it's like yeah, because like we
Wow.
knew each other. So
Yeah.
it's really cool. And the one other part that I think is really interesting that is not often talked about. I mean, this was your first Eid after your mom passed away. I want to hear, like, you probably had lots of emotions, right? I have every single event. Like, I remember at my own wedding,
Yeah.
my brother's best friend, he was there, and like in the middle of the wedding, I was just hanging out with him and just start crying. Like, I'm like, oh man,
Mm,
this is very tough. Like, I expected him to be here.
yeah.
So
Man,
those
sorry.
moments get really hard. And I think as those people that you remember seeing, like, and again, it goes back, like, I have seen my mom for every Eid of my life, and to not have her
Yeah.
at one Eid, like, is going to be a very different experience.
Man, again, I'm sorry about how that bubbles up and like what you shared about your wedding. Eid was tough. Eid was really tough. Ramadan was tough. So actually the first day of Ramadan, there was all this kind of enthusiasm. There's like so much good energy right at the
Right.
beginning of Ramadan. And for iftar, we had my dad over and my wife's parents over, and you have the empty chair, right? And that is like that hit me really hard.
Yeah,
And
that's
like
very tough.
as we were breaking fast and I'm making like a dua, I'm like looking around and I really felt her presence missed, and I started breaking down. So I like booked it upstairs so I wouldn't, disrupt the whole thing. Not that I was trying to like hide from my kids or whatever, but just so that, it didn't seem like the right moment. And then on Eid, we were at my brother's house, and then my wife is like, the cemetery is not that far from here. Like, let's just make a stop. And I was like, no, no, I think like let's just go. Like, we'll come back. It's just like been a long day, blah blah blah. And she's like, no, I think we should go. And I didn't realize how much I needed to go,
Yeah,
see
yeah.
my mom's grave as much as I did. It was like it was weighing on me the whole day, and I think I was just going through the motions. And then we go there, and while all five of us were there, the only ones at the actual grave at that particular moment were me and my oldest son. At that point, I just really like started crying, and my son, who like we were just kind of like had our arms around each other, he just like pulled me in and like gave me the biggest hug
Yeah.
and just like hugged me while I wept. And to our points earlier about kids and how they manage, and like they kind of know in
They
some ways,
know.
there's something innate there.
Yeah,
And so there's something
yeah,
like in that moment he was taking care of me, and I was I was like,
yeah.
you know totally out of it.
I think kids past a certain age, like they are like essentially fully grown adults. Like they can they have cognitive cognition that we
Fully
underestimate.
Yeah.
autonomous. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Before my mom passed, I thought after, once she passes, I'll just be like broken for many weeks or months. And I just like, my mom has, and my ummi is gone, she's not here anymore. And this is so finite and it's just so painful. But after it happened, I'm realizing that one, Allah gives you strength, right? So there's that part of it. But on top of that, this like feeling of what would my mom want me to do? She wouldn't want me to be like sitting in this and just like, she would want me to do the best at whatever I'm taking on right now. Right. So, I think that really is like something that propels also.
There's so much to take in from that. I guess like one thing I want to kind of touch on also is how hasn't community not shown up for you in your moment of vulnerability? Like what has been a delta, a miss, something that you wish that it hadn't been that way?
That's a big one. Emma, while I think of
Yeah,
that
because I
answer,
have I have
you,
some thoughts here.
Yeah, I want to hear your.
I have to say, when my mother-in-law passed, there were a few aunties and uncles that I was quite disappointed in.
Hmm.
Not being there for my father-in-law and giving us like lectures about what we could have done better to care for my mother-in-law. I mean, there was an active
Are you
lecture.
serious? Like this happened?
This happened, like, and I found it so
That's so crazy.
preposterous. Like there was
Yeah.
one auntie that lectured my wife before my mother-in-law passed on what she should be doing for my mother-in-law's care, which was absolutely so out of this world, so uncalled
Hmm.
for, and it made me really
and
angry
without
in the moment.
context, I'm sure.
Without context, right? And Desis are the masters of having no context, right? They have no tact, no chill, and I don't hold a grudge, but I think aunties and uncles do a really bad job in our community of just being there and letting things be and understanding where other people are and where they're coming from. Like there's this weird notion of like expectations that are placed, from our community, Desis, that they place on you. And those expectations were being relayed to my wife in her moment of extreme pain and loss. And I just found that to be so out of place. So, um, Yeah, I haven't had a good experience with aunties and uncles, and I think this is more of a generational thing.
Dude, I'm sorry. That sucks. Like
Yeah, it's
getting advice
totally
like
unfair.
that or lectures, that's a that's a real bummer. I think the part that probably overall I'm pretty impressed by how the community came, including older members and the prior generation. And there's also this like just kind of saying the words that they're supposed to say and then moving on.
Mhm.
And it feels a little like scripted, but people also don't know what to say in that moment. So I think
Yeah.
everyone should get a pass, except for like some really egregious shit that,
Totally.
I mean,
that's not cool to just describe.
I generally don't give passes, but that's just who I am.
Yeah, yeah.
We see that. We see that. I want to say like I feel like I don't have any issues with anything. Like I don't know what the counterfactual would be, but I do say that I do think that like for how much faith in being prepared for death we say we are, or at least I say I am like so ill prepared because
So ill
all the
prepared.
work that I should be doing in like my trust and will and making sure like it's as low overhead for anyone to deal with, like I have done like very little preparation.
Wait, hold
And I
on.
think that yeah,
Break that down. You haven't done your will and trust?
I have not done my will and trust, and I need to like we're like we keep saying, oh, we got to do this, like it's like
Let
on
this
our
be a PSA.
yeah, exactly.
Emad actually wants to live forever like Brian Johnson. So this is why he hasn't
250.
planned
He's an
his
infant.
will
Yeah.
or trust.
The guy is an infant.
He's an infant. Okay, so I'm curious. You've experienced all these different emotions over the last couple of months, and obviously Emad for you for quite some time. Can you guys share something random, or maybe like a humorous thing that's reminded you of your mom Sajid or your brother Emad?
Well, there's something that we always would talk about in respect to my mom, even before she passed. So when she saw something that was not exactly to her liking, instead of saying anything negative, she would say something different. And that has like become such a thing. Like our whole family, my kids, my in laws, like everybody, like will say something different. And that just like is a trigger for like, in kind of a fun way, remembering her and showing love to her.
Yeah, I like how it's become like sort of like maybe a new family tradition.
Yeah.
How about you, Emad? Any specific things that kind of bring laughter or joy
Yeah,
or
I mean,
something
I
funny?
think so. My brother is just a very like silly person. He would like just do pull pranks and like crack all the dad jokes that you you know you can imagine, to the point where like you know he showed up to events wearing a SpongeBob tie, and I see so much resemblance in my sister, in both
Mhm.
my kids, the way that they so there's not a day that I'm not like reminded about him anymore, which is really fun and cool to see. So it's kind of nice, and like it's just I remember when he passed away. At some point after that, I just like thought to myself that hey, like I will try to laugh twice as much and try to live the joy that he would want to live.
Mm.
And I feel like over the last, it's been what, 21 years since this happened. And I am not only trying to live that, but like seeing that in my sister and my two kids is just so great.
That's beautiful, man. Another thing, Imad, that you just said that like I'm happy to hear is you think about him every single day. I think about my mom every single day, but it's only been 75 days. And I kind of sometimes fear that like, do people stop thinking about their loved ones as
Yeah.
much? And I never want that to happen, right? Like I always want her to be front of mind for me the way that she has always been in my life. And yeah, it sounds like, you lost your brother so many years ago, which man, I like losing a mom is one thing, but losing, a
Yeah,
brother in a tragic situation is like so heavy. So,
yeah.
man,
Well, I mean, I look, I'll as much as I say all of this, this is very tough for me, but like I also get to see my parents and who lost a kid that
yeah,
was 19 years old. That
yeah,
they like that is like the next level that like, and I see that every time I see them, right? Like I see their grief. Like you cannot meet with them without feeling the grief pouring out of them almost
mm,
every day. And
Hmm.
that's tough. It's so tough. The only thing, and my wife, like she's the one who's like observing this whole family
hmm
from the
Right.
outside. And the only time she's like, man, I've seen joy in your parents is when they hang out with our kids. But other than that, man, it's just tough to like watch, right? And it's hard not to like be in it with them, like it's just it's
yeah.
that's and I don't know how to deal with that. I mean, I think that we're gonna carry this grief, and this is they're normal parts of life, but then there are like parts of life that you're like, I don't want to even go there of like what it could feel like to
Yeah.
live
So
there, you know?
I guess on pulling on that thread, Emad, like how do you navigate others through grief? Like how do you manage and navigate your parents?
It's hard. I don't know the answer to this. Like, I think it happened so early on. Now I realize this. I didn't realize it. Like, I was just a kid. I was a 21-year-old kid when this
Yeah,
happened to me. And
yeah.
I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to like, how to be there for my parents who probably needed me a lot more than, hey, I was there for them. So it's been really hard to like, I know I can hold space and I know the feelings and the emotions that anyone who has lost somebody close, like I can feel it, but it's been hard to like give some because there's nothing you can do to like get rid of grief. Like I think
Hmm.
that's hard, like not, and that's not fair. I think that's that the concept of spiritual bypass that you're saying. Like I think that's not fair to like try to like heal,
No,
right? Like you have to like, I think that's a part of life that you kind of have to be okay with.
you can't
You
go
can't go
around it.
around it. You can't go
You have
around
to
it.
go through it, and maybe
Yeah.
you go through it for a long time or forever.
My wife was very close to her mom, and her mom unfortunately passed away at a very young age. She was barely into her 60s when she passed. So it was, kind of very, I wouldn't say abrupt. She had been dealing with, a chronic disease and illness for a long time. So, but nothing prepares you for that moment. And,
Yeah.
I think for me, my biggest, something that I had to learn was that you can't just talk and impose your own emotions onto the person that is grieving, right? Like sometimes, and she told me this is like, sometimes you just need to let me be. That is that's such sage advice. Just because someone is experiencing some emotion, that doesn't mean that you have to provide advice or you need to make sense of it. What's more important is that you let them experience that emotion and let them go through it and help them through it. And sometimes helping them through it is just letting them experience it.
You know what's interesting about what you just said is your instinct was kind of like the auntie that you were complaining about earlier, and that you wanted to do something, right, to help. And auntie's reaction is bad. Your reaction might be more loving and thoughtful, but still, that's not what's needed right then. What's needed is what you described, maybe space or maybe a bite to eat. I don't know. So, like, it's like there's no like right way to grieve, but I think one thing that I've learned is giving people space in a way that is actually uncomfortable. It's like the silence in the room, the awkward
Yeah.
silence. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you need to
The
give
I
awkward
agree.
pause. Yeah.
Yeah.
awkward space for grief. It's like what I said about apologizing to friends who lost especially a parent. I realized how like emotional I was about it, maybe with them or supportive. Our guy Zishan, for example, showed up for me when I lost Emmy in a way that like, he did like little things because he went through it like only a few years ago. And I think you only know after you've gone through it, I think is kind of part of the issue.
And one thing I think it's an interesting. This is a very cultural thing that I wish we did differently. Whenever I haven't been to in like a non-Muslim funeral yet, but at least like watching from movies or observing, like their funerals are very much a celebration of life plus grieving. Ours
Yeah.
don't seem to have that secondary component where you bring a lot of their memories and like people like it's not a natural thing. At least I haven't observed it. I don't know how if it's been different here for you all.
Dude, that's a really good point, and actually another example of my wife knowing I needed something without me knowing or asking for it. So, we had Ami's funeral, we got together at my brother's house a couple of days in a row, but then she helped organize this, we called it a dua and remembrance, and this was at my
Mm,
house. Ahmed was there. Emad, you were out of town, otherwise, I know,
yeah.
I would've seen you. And, like, most of the people didn't know my mom, but came out of love and, like, celebrated her, made dua for her and then celebrated her life, like, really genuinely.
I love that. I feel like this is
Yeah,
if
people
there's
came up
one
and were
thing
like, "Whoa,
people should take away
we've never
is
done."
like, yeah,
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 we've never been to something like that, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't know," and, like, we had neighbors there, we had,
all
Muslims,
right. This
non-Muslims,
should
like
be a start. I think we should like show up for each other in a way that's like, yeah, and credit to your wife who got this going. I feel like that's a really good practice to like propagate.
but, yeah, I didn't know that I I would appreciate it as much as I would, and, like, Salman was there too, who's, not on camera, but is obviously our producer, and, like, everyone showed up with, like, different, like, ways of, like, showing love and support. Like, I remember Salman pulled me aside, but, like, he said some things to me, and, like, they just really stuck.
Wow, you mean Mr. Producer was yelling at you for doing
Oof.
something wrong?
Yeah, he was like, "Hey, dude, can you, like, fix your lighting on the show?" Like, I think that's what he was talking about. I was like, "Dude, come on, my mom just died, bro. Give me a break."
Yeah, like give me space. Give me space.
Yeah, give me some space.
Give me some space. No, I think that's a wonderful note to end on is I think we should be celebrating life more often than we do today. You know, life is precious. Our loved ones are even more precious. And, here's to celebrating them more often. You know, a couple of quick closing thoughts. Grief really doesn't go away. It's something that just becomes a part of you. And it helps you move through life. As men, I think it's really important to, sort of recognize that we've been conditioned to being stoic and, this macho man or macho personality. But I think it's okay to show emotions. You should show emotions. You know, you should cry. You should be angry. You should be happy. And above all, you should celebrate those loved ones that are near and dear to you and those loved ones that have passed. Because I think in all of this, your kids are emulating you. And, they need to see that range of emotion if we're here to create better human beings for the future.
Before we break, sorry, Emma, one really beautiful idea related to everything you're saying that someone shared with me. There's this, person named Bell Hooks, and she talks about how death allows us the freedom to love someone perfectly. And really, the
Mm.
idea is that all of the love you have for the person becomes just uncomplicated in death.
Hmm.
And I think that's like a really liberating idea.
That's
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
that's a very deep quote. Something I wouldn't expect from you.
Have there been any good resources? Any other resources you'd recommend? I'm so glad you mentioned that you're seeing a therapist. Maybe is that what
Yeah,
did you mention?
that that's been huge. That's been
Yeah.
great. Seeing a therapist, I think, has helped me a lot. And outside of that, talking to a few like key people that I lean on a lot. And then going on walks. Like I started going on hikes and walks like way more.
Good stuff. Well, to both of you, I greatly, greatly appreciate your vulnerability I think it's necessary conversation, so I greatly appreciate both of you. To our audience, I hope you take something great from this conversation. As always, I'd be remiss to not say, please rate, like, follow, and subscribe. We are at NaanSense Show on Instagram and on YouTube. Also, we want to hear from you. In what ways have you dealt with grief or, other elements of loss? We are nonsenseshow@gmail.com. Anyway, until next time.
One last thing. Make dua for Emad and my mom.
Tons of dua for Emad and Sajid's mom and for all the loved ones that we have lost through life. See you next time.
Bye.